Noam Chomsky, one of the most influential intellectuals of our time, has a clear and disturbing message. Organized humanity's time is running out. This is not cheap scaremongering. It is a diagnosis based on facts. The combination of climate crises, growing authoritarianism, and media manipulation is leading us to a point of no return. In this video, we'll explore the reasons behind this gloomy forecast, understand how we got here, and, above all, reflect on what can be done to avoid total collapse. If you're concerned about the future of the planet and civilization, this video is for you. Before we start, leave your likes and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on content like this. Now, let's dive into Chomsky's thinking and find out if there's still time to reverse this scenario. Noam Chomsky is neither a chaos theorist nor a baseless alarmist. With decades of study of politics, economics, and communication, he has built up a critical view of the modern world, and his latest analysis is worrying. We are approaching the end of organized humanity. But what does this really mean? For Chomsky, organized humanity is the social, political, and economic structure that allows civilization to function in a stable way. However, this stability is being eroded by a series of interconnected factors: environmental degradation, the rise of authoritarian regimes, and the manipulation of information. The central point of his warning is that if we don't act quickly, the very notion of a structured society could fall apart, leading to a state of permanent chaos. One of the examples Chomsky highlights is the climate crisis. He argues that we are not just facing gradual changes in the environment, but a radical transformation that could make the planet uninhabitable for billions of people. Time to act is running out, and world leaders continue to postpone crucial decisions for the sake of immediate economic interests. In addition, Chomsky warns of the growing power of corporations and authoritarian governments, which exploit technology to surveil, control, and manipulate the masses. Democracy, he says, is at risk not only because of explicit authoritarianism, but also because of the widespread apathy of the people who have become accustomed to accepting imposed conditions without question. The question remains: are we prepared to recognize these signs and act before it's too late? If anyone still doubts Chomsky's warning, just look at the world around us. The signs of collapse are not mere theoretical predictions. They are already happening before our eyes. The climate crisis is reaching irreversible levels. Extreme heat waves, uncontrolled forest fires, devastating hurricanes, and prolonged droughts are no longer isolated events, but a new reality. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, we have already crossed critical environmental thresholds, and the inertia of governments is only exacerbating the problem. Chomsky warns that if we don't control greenhouse gas emissions now, we will be condemning future generations to a hostile and unpredictable planet. But environmental degradation is just one piece of the puzzle. Political instability is also growing on a global scale. Democracies are being eroded by populist leaders who exploit fear and misinformation to stay in power. Extremist speeches, attacks on institutions, and repression of the press have become commonplace, even in countries that were once considered examples of freedom. At the same time, economic inequality has never been greater. While billionaires amass unimaginable fortunes, billions of people struggle to survive on miserable wages. Chomsky points out that this concentration of wealth is not only a social injustice, but a direct threat to global stability. A world where a few control everything and many have nothing is a powder keg ready to explode. Faced with this scenario, a fundamental question arises: how did we get to this point? To understand this better, we need to look at the role of technology and artificial intelligence in this equation. Technology, which was once seen as the key to human progress, has today become one of the greatest threats to our social organization. Chomsky warns that we are not just advancing technologically, but losing control over the tools we have created. Artificial intelligence, for example, is radically transforming the world of work. Companies are replacing workers with algorithms and robots, further widening economic inequality. The result? Millions of unemployed people with no prospect of re-entering the market. Meanwhile, the wealth generated by these innovations is concentrated in the hands of a few, widening the divide between rich and poor. In addition, technology has become an instrument of surveillance and control. Governments and corporations use big data to monitor citizens, predict behavior, and influence decisions. Social networks, which are supposed to connect people, are used to manipulate opinions and spread disinformation. The very concept of privacy is disappearing, and many accept this reality without resistance. For Chomsky, the issue is not just the advance of technology, but who controls it. Today, big companies and authoritarian governments hold this power. If society does not mobilize to regulate and limit this domination, technology will not be a tool for liberation, but a mechanism for oppression. The question that arises is, are we really in control of our own destiny? Or have we already become hostages of a system that we can no longer contain? We live in the information age, but that doesn't mean we're better informed. On the contrary, according to Noam Chomsky, we are being bombarded with an absurd amount of data, distorted narratives, and fake news that obscure reality and prevent collective action. Disinformation is not an error of the system. It is a deliberate strategy of control. The traditional media, which used to be considered a reliable source of news, is increasingly compromised by economic and political interests. Large media conglomerates filter what reaches the public, shaping the perception of reality according to their own agendas. Independent journalists are silenced while sensationalism and distractions dominate the news. Tragedies become entertainment, and really important issues are left aside. At the same time, the rise of social media has created a new battleground for the information war. Today, anyone can disseminate content, but this doesn't always mean more freedom of expression. Platforms like Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and TikTok use algorithms that promote content based on engagement rather than truthfulness. This creates information bubbles and strengthens conspiracy theories, while concrete facts are discredited. Chomsky points out that one of the greatest dangers of disinformation is the apathy it generates. When people are constantly exposed to lies, manipulation, and contradictory narratives, many simply give up searching for the truth. The result? A population that is alienated, confused, and easily manipulated. Disinformation not only distorts reality, but also prevents any attempt at change. If the public cannot distinguish between what is real and what is false, how can they make informed decisions? How can they mobilize to tackle global challenges? This is one of the reasons why organized humanity is under threat. We can no longer trust even our own perceptions. The problem is exacerbated when authoritarian governments use this confusion to their advantage. In totalitarian regimes, the manipulation of information is a central pillar of power. But even in democratic countries, the truth is under constant attack. Scientists are discredited, journalists are persecuted, and history is rewritten to suit the interests of specific groups. If society is unable to resist this war for truth, we run the risk of losing one of the fundamental pillars of civilization, the ability to discern, question, and seek knowledge. But while information is manipulated, one of the greatest challenges of our age continues to be ignored: the climate crisis. If there is one consensus among serious scientists around the world, it is this: we are destroying the planet at an alarming rate. The climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. It is already affecting millions of lives. Lethal heat waves, violent storms, rising sea levels, uncontrollable forest fires, and the mass extinction of species are happening now. And yet, what do we see from governments? Empty promises, agreements that are never kept, and a suicidal insistence on maintaining an economic model based on environmental destruction. Noam Chomsky warns that the real problem is not a lack of knowledge about the seriousness of the situation, but a lack of political will to act. The reason is simple. The logic of immediate profit always prevails over any concern for the future. The world's biggest corporations, especially those in the fossil fuel sector, have enough power to influence political decisions and ensure that any real change is postponed for as long as possible. Meanwhile, ordinary people deal with the impacts of this destruction on a daily basis, paying the price for the elite's neglect. The most alarming thing is that, even in the face of unquestionable evidence, there is still a significant portion of the population that denies the existence of the climate crisis. This is no coincidence, but rather the direct result of deliberate disinformation promoted by powerful sectors that profit from environmental destruction. Companies fund campaigns to discredit scientists, while politicians use ideological polarization to turn a global problem into a mere dispute of narrative. The question that arises is, how long can we ignore reality before it's too late? Does humanity really have the capacity to change its course, or are we doomed to watch civilization collapse without reacting? Now, I want to know what you think. Do you believe that governments can still reverse this situation, or have we already passed the point of no return? Leave your comment below and don't forget to like the video. It really helps to spread this discussion and reach more people. While the planet faces environmental, economic, and social crises, there is another phenomenon that is growing silently, making everything even more dangerous: the rise of authoritarianism. For Noam Chomsky, this movement is no accident, but a direct consequence of people's disillusionment with current political system. In times of instability, many societies look for strong leaders, figures who promise quick solutions to complex problems. These leaders, however, often use popular anger to consolidate their own power, attacking civil rights, silencing opponents, and concentrating more and more control over the state. The result is a gradual erosion of democracy, where the population becomes accustomed to authoritarian measures under the justification of security and stability. The pattern repeats itself throughout history. Dictatorships don't emerge overnight, but through small concessions. Censorship, persecution of journalists, restrictions on protests, and attacks on democratic institutions begin subtly until, before you know it, freedom is gone. Chomsky warns that modern technology has made this process even more efficient. Today, authoritarian governments use mass surveillance systems, artificial intelligence, and information manipulation to ensure that their narrative is the only one accepted. Social networks, which could be tools of resistance, are often used to control and divide the population. What makes this scenario even more worrying is the normalization of repression. Many people, tired of the corruption and inefficiency of democracies, accept these changes without resistance, believing them to be a necessary evil. As a result, authoritarian regimes grow stronger, hindering any attempted change in the future. If this cycle continues, the organized humanity we know could give way to a world where freedom becomes an illusion and decisions are restricted to a small power elite. What was once the exception could become the rule, and entire societies could end up living under regimes that control every aspect of life. Democracy has always been seen as one of civilization's greatest advances. The idea that people can choose their rulers and influence the direction of society is a fundamental principle for freedom and justice. However, according to Noam Chomsky, this model is collapsing. And the reason for this goes far beyond the rise of authoritarian government. The real danger lies in the apathy and conformism of the population itself. Over the last few years, the world has witnessed a worrying phenomenon: people's growing disinterest in politics. Voting, being informed, and actively participating in society have become secondary for many, as if politics had no real impact on their lives. This behavior is exactly what allows corrupt and authoritarian governments to grow stronger. After all, when the majority doesn't care, A very well-organized and self-interested minority can take control without resistance. But how did we get to this point? Chomsky explains that it didn't happen by chance. The system has been deliberately shaped to discourage popular participation. Traditional media and social networks are flooded with distractions, turning politics into a superficial spectacle where important debates are reduced to empty slogans and personal attacks. Meanwhile, essential issues such as social inequality, climate change, and labor rights are left by the wayside. Another factor contributing to this conformism is a growing sense of powerlessness. Many people feel that no matter what they do, nothing really changes. Corruption, bureaucracy, and the game of interests between politicians and large corporations make people lose faith in the system. This discouragement creates a dangerous spiral. The less people believe in democracy, the more room they give for authoritarian figures to take control. The consequence of this is a progressive weakening of democratic institutions. When a government starts restricting freedoms, controlling the press, and repressing demonstrations, many passively accept it because they believe there is no viable alternative. The problem is that the longer this mentality persists, the more difficult it becomes to reverse the situation. History has shown countless times that authoritarian regimes are not easily overthrown, especially when they are built on the conformism of society. If democracy continues to be treated as an irrelevant detail in everyday life, we run the risk of seeing it disappear without us even realizing. The real challenge, according to Chomsky, is not just to resist authoritarianism, but to awaken people from their apathy and make them understand that politics is not a distant game, but the basis of everything that affects our lives. For centuries, we have been taught to believe that economic growth is synonymous with progress. The more an economy grows, the more prosperous a country becomes. At least, that's the dominant narrative. However, Noam Chomsky argues that this view is not only mistaken, but also dangerous. The current economic model, based on infinite growth, is leading us towards environmental, social, and political collapse. The logic of this system is simple. Produce more, sell more, profit more. Governments and companies promote this cycle as something positive, but rarely discuss the long-term consequences. To maintain this growth, natural resources are exploited without limit, the environment is devastated, and millions of workers are subjected to increasingly precarious conditions. The paradox is evident. Although economic indices indicate growth, inequality has never been greater. Billionaires amass unimaginable fortunes while millions of people live in misery. Large corporations make profits like never before, but real wages have remained stagnant for decades. If economic progress were really synonymous with well-being, why doesn't the quality of life of most people improve? Chomsky points out that this illusion of progress is maintained through propaganda and media manipulation. The system makes us believe that if we work hard enough, we too can achieve success. However, the reality is that the concentration of wealth and power prevents most people from really prospering. The so-called economic dream works for the few, while the majority struggle just to survive. What's more, this model of perpetual growth ignores an essential factor: the limits of the planet. Resources such as drinking water, arable land, and minerals are finite, and unbridled exploitation is already having devastating impacts. The idea that we can keep expanding our economies indefinitely is an illusion that distances us from reality. The question that arises is, how long can the system continue before it collapses? If we insist on this path, we will be condemning future generations to a world of extreme inequality, irreversible environmental crises, and permanent social instability. What looks like progress could actually be the recipe for the destruction of organized humanity. Faced with such an alarming panorama, the inevitable question arises: is there a way out? Noam Chomsky believes there is, but it won't come from the top down. The political and economic elites who control the current system have no interest in changing the structure that benefits them. Transformation, therefore, needs to come from ordinary people, from organized society, from conscious resistance. The first step is to recognize that we are not as powerless as we are led to believe. The feeling that nothing can be done is one of the system's most powerful weapons to ensure that it remains intact. If millions of people accept passivity, no change will be possible. But if there is mobilization, pressure, and awareness, the course of history can be altered. Education plays a central role in this change. And here, we're not just talking about formal education, but the active search for critical knowledge, questioning ready-made narratives, understanding how power operates, and identifying historical patterns are fundamental skills for not falling into the traps of media and political manipulation. Another crucial factor is collective organization. No significant change has happened in history without groups coming together to fight for it. From labor movements to protests for civil and environmental rights, all the great achievements were the result of the joint action of people who refused to accept the status quo. Furthermore, we need to re-evaluate our concept of success and progress. The current model teaches us that the purpose of life is to accumulate wealth, but this mentality only perpetuates inequality and environmental destruction. We need a new vision of society, where collective well-being is the priority, not just economic growth at any cost. This means pressuring governments to take real action against the climate crisis, demanding transparency and accountability from large corporations, and supporting initiatives that promote a more sustainable and equal economy. Small individual actions, such as consuming more consciously and valuing companies and politicians committed to structural change, are also part of this process. The question that remains is, are we willing to break out of our inertia and take responsibility for the future? The transformation won't be easy or quick, but the alternative, continuing on the current path, means accepting the inevitable collapse of organized humanity. After everything we've discussed, one thing is clear. Organized humanity is facing one of its most critical moments. The climate crisis, the rise of authoritarianism, the manipulation of information, and the illusion of economic progress are all forces that, if left unaddressed, could lead to the collapse of civilization as we know it. Noam Chomsky is not just warning of a distant future. He is showing us a present that already bears the signs of this decay. The time to act is not in 10 or 20 years' time. It is now. If we continue to passively accept the degradation of the environment, the erosion of democracy, and the absurd concentration of wealth and power, we will only be accelerating the end of organized humanity. But, as we have seen, the solution exists. Change depends on our ability to question, to educate ourselves, to organize ourselves, and not to accept the narrative that this is the way things are, and there's nothing we can do about it. The biggest mistake we can make is to believe that we are powerless in the face of this scenario. History has proven that societies can change their course when there is mobilization and collective awareness. Now I want to know, after everything we've discussed, do you think there's still time to reverse this scenario, or have we already passed the point of no return? Leave your opinion in the comments. And if this video made you think, don't forget to like it. It really helps the channel to keep bringing you this kind of content. And most importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. The more people who wake up to this reality, the greater the chances of building a different future.